Hello everyone, my name is Genea Canelles, I'm from Italy and I'm from the Erasmus University of Urban Management Department. My apologies for not being there with you, but bureaucratic reason sometimes of course. So I just want to thank you also the administration and the organization of the Southampton University for allowing me anyway to participate, even if from far. What I'm going to introduce today, it's a kind of summer up and the first stage of my PhD research about sharing economies and local regulation path. So I will try to be as brief as possible, but my presentation will be mostly organizing in two parts. The first one, where I'm going to explore and define the concept of sharing economies, and the second part where I'm going to pass through some examples and some definition of the regulations part. So, first of all, for me the definition of what is sharing economies is one of the most important things in my research. This is because in the moment that I'm going to explore deeply, especially with the field work, how the regulation and the system and in general how the local administration has to deal with this new phenomenon, then I have to, of course, we have to know what we are talking about. So, and for me it's been very emblematic this sentence of published in 2015 by the Wall Street Journal by Christopher Miles, when he said, "If Task Rabbits is part of the sharing economy, then so is every work in America." And this is a little bit what I passed through when I started quite recently, 9 months ago, my exploration of the sharing economy. I was pretty new about the knowledge of this concept, and I started to, first of all, look at what is the people perception and what, of course, the first article published about this. A little bit as Christopher had the same perception. How do you define sharing economy? Because sometimes it really looks like that many phenomena that we have already been used to can be defined as sharing economy, can be part of this, let's say, new social innovation. Well, we have many ways to proceed in a definition part, but we can proceed through inclusion, for instance. That's what I'm going to do later, especially with the field works. We can proceed by exclusion. That's what I have to confess I did so far, because it was also a little bit easier. And then looking for the novelty, when especially you are going to explore something that is not defined yet. So, what are the element that so far everybody agree upon about what is sharing economy and why sharing economy started to arise? Well, what I found in my exploration of the people perception of the sharing economy is that most of them recognize as a lower common denominator some of the elements of the rising of the sharing economies. And first of all, in the environmental attention that people is putting on in this period. And the quality of the shared good appears to be a key requirement for the environmental sustainability. Because of course, in the moment that we are going to apply some of the new mechanisms that the sharing economies unlocked, of course there is a positive consequence and external positive impact on the environmental side. But of course, the rising of the sharing economies, most of the people agree, has been possible also through the ICT accessibility. Because the online platform enabled people to be connected to each other in a scale that it was not possible before, it was not accessible before. But at the same time, people also recognize, most of the things at least I've been able to read so far, that also the community values and the renaissance of the community's feeling has been one of the drivers for the arising of the sharing economies. But in the same time, on my path through the discovery of the regulation side of the sharing economies, I've been also trying to look further to other reasons why now and not before, and why now in these modalities and not in others, we are actually experiencing these new phenomena of the sharing economies. And this is also because my research is mostly based on the European context for comparison reason in a scientific method. And also because in the regulation side, for me, the government part is very important. So I also identify as one of the reasons of the rising of the sharing economies with the welfare state retreat. This is because basically, due to budget constraint that most of the European countries experience is linked to the perception of the people and the constraint they experience every day. Even if most of the people can affirm that actually we are living in a period of abundance, well, the perception of the people, especially after the economic crisis, is not so linear. So, and the retreat of the welfare state in the services provision, according to my research so far, had an impact in the rising of the sharing economies. And of course, this is directly linked to the process of the process that we can define as privatization or liberalization, that in the European context started to arise around the 80s and improving, especially in the north side of European Union, in the latest years. And of course, many agrees about what is been the impact of the economic crisis started in 2008. But defining sharing economies, again, is not very easy, so I started also to select some elements that I've been able to read around. And some of them spread from the sectors. Many agree that sharing economies involve different kinds of sectors, from food, energy, goods, space, and mobility. Personally, I'm going to focus mostly on the service sectors. Then also many identify what are the main characteristics of the sharing economies, and they agree that the novelty of the sharing economies rely mostly on the use of underused assets, the renaissance of community activities, and as we said, the accessibility to ICT technologies. But then during this definition process, what actually pushed me in more confusion is when people say that sharing economies operate through different modalities that spread from swapping to renting to lending to donating to gifting, where I started to wonder then about what is really sharing economy and why so many synonyms overlap each other. And this is possible also to see from through some of the definitions that are available in academic and non-academic publications. And so I agree about Archidiacono, who said that this doubtedness about sharing economy is also generated by the numerous synonyms that are used to define sharing economies. As we can see from, for instance, the market definition report, they say sometimes called sharing economy or collaborative consumption. Or the following aspects: swapping, exchanging, collecting, purchasing. So as we can see, without going too deep into this, is that many times sharing economy has been defined with different kind of terms. So what I did is first of all passing through to the origins of the concept itself. From one side about the concept of sharing, and from the other side to the concept of economy. Here, of course, I report just shortly one of the authors that investigated the concept of sharing from its roots. Belk, in several publications, affirm that sharing is a different kind, passed through different kind of actions. And actually, what is interesting is that in the sharing economies, we can see that some of the activities actually are still attached to the origin of the concept of sharing. For instance, we can easily say that the sharing economy is an act and process of distributing what is ours to others. Yes, we can easily say this. As well as sharing tends to be a communal act that links us to other people. But at the same time, when you explore the concept of sharing from its roots, you also see that the way we operate the sharing modality is also changed. Because, for instance, sharing has been defined as an activity that is more characterized from an interior world as an exterior one, especially was linked to the family context. Well, we can easily affirm that actually at present the sharing modality is happening in an external world, mostly between strangers. And this doesn't limit the act of sharing actually. And has been defined sharing as a non-reciprocal pro-social behavior. But at present we can actually say that sharing economy is definitely a reciprocal pro-social behavior. So what I started to wonder is that, so if some action that are identified or maybe just representing some sharing economy platform don't have these kind of characteristics, then we are not talking about sharing economies. This, of course, is still an open question, especially because then when we define sharing economy. And I think this is one of the aspects mostly under-evaluated about sharing economy. Because economy itself, if we just go back to simply vocabulary definitions, we see that it's nothing more than a process or system by which goods and services are produced, sold, and bought. But it's also in these things that most of the critics arise, especially when some of the sharing, most recognized companies now are doing billions of euros, said, no, you are not sharing economies anymore. Then I wonder why. Because actually, okay, we identify some of the characteristics of the sharing that define sharing economies as a novelty, like the lack of ownership, the empowerment of the community, the environmental attention, and the ICT accessibility. But I think that exactly in this economic side of the sharing economy relies the real novelty. And this is the fact that people are now proceeding with maybe some modalities that has been used for many years, but they're doing independently from the institution. Because people are now self-relying on the community, as we saw, and on their activities itself. And how they're doing this? Because they're making also profit. With this, I don't want to say that the sharing economies activities are exclusively the activities that are making profit out of this, but I don't think we should evaluate negatively the part that some of the activities that are actually creating an economic long-term sustainability independently from other actors. That could be the private sector, as it could be actually the institutions, so the public sector. I create this kind of diagram where you can actually see three sections: the red, the green, and the brown. In this, also accordingly to the Sharing City book, I created three main categories that, let's say, pass from community to market activity, from individual and group, from ownership and non-ownership. I leave the sector for granted, like space, housing, food, energy, transport, and so on. And then I try to start to make a comparison, as I said, by exclusion, with other activities that actually in the academic studies in the last and also in the past years has been very well explored, that were actually resembling like some of the sharing economic activities that are collected inside platforms like Shareable, We Share, or ShareNet. And it can spread from social entrepreneurship, self-organization, cooperatives, co-production, and this line is actually the one who represents the sharing economies. The colors represent the distinction between the different sectors with a shade of grades from 1 to 5, when 5 is the darkest. Okay, we can easily see that the shade of the colors sometimes are not so marked. Because, yes, we can say that sharing economies has many of the characteristics that belong to very well explored concepts like co-production. But at the same time, it's emerging with its own characteristics. Like, as we said, a dependency from the institution, and we are going to see a little bit better later. And for instance, the fact that they are trying to look for an economic long-term sustainability. So, and I think this is a real value for the sharing economy. But at the same time, I said why people are really overlapping things that for me has a different meaning, especially when you are in the academic side where everything has to be maybe too much, but very well defined. So for me, concepts like collaborative consumption is not the same thing of sharing economy, because for instance, consumption is only one of the sides that is in the economic system. So at the end, I try to make a kind of diagram where personally I identify in the collaborative economy the big umbrella where all these systems that we can define as a next economy are actually included. So collaborative economy for me it's a terminology that can really embrace many of the new phenomena that we are exploring. That can also include collaborative consumption, as it can include circular economy, forms of cooperatives, but for me, sharing economy is just one of these new forms of next economy under the umbrella of the collaborative economy. Of course, this is still a work in progress and totally open. So I'm very open to explore more how to really aggregate this new social innovation. So for me, how it's been defined so far, sharing economy is not, of course, very well delineated, but for the moment, for me it's a form basically of self-organization. And this just briefly make a distinction from the concept of participation, that is more passive concept where people actually just respond to an input from the top, from the governments. For me, very well heavily describe the concept of self-organization and why I say sharing economy is a form of self-organization. Because it basically, self-organization arises to address market deficit. And we said that actually one of the reasons why sharing economy arises is also the economic constraint. So it doesn't define exclusively the rising of the sharing economy, but for sure it has an impact. In doing what? In meeting people's needs. Because really people also in their community activities, what they're looking for is a compensation of services or needs that has not been provided anymore. So, especially in the case of sharing economy, the market deficit doesn't regard exclusively the offer itself, but what is very interesting and I hope to explore more is also how in the economic system, how the sharing economy are impacting the system itself, operating from inside. So the classic chain of production, consumption, production is not excluded, but for sure it's innovated. So going to the regulation part and leading to the second part of the presentation, the regulation, I started to think that maybe the usual way we intended the regulation is a little bit updated. Because for me the main question is not how the public administration meet the sharers, and not how the sharer meet the public administration, but how they meet each other. We have been used to the Weberian approach to an administration that is mostly organized in a hierarchical way, where people were most passive through the reception of the government services provision. And then we switched, and I go very quickly about this, in what has been the approach called a new public management, where also third actors and third sector were started to be included. But I don't think we are in either of these forms now. I think we are actually experiencing a new way of participation that it goes also beyond the simple concept of governance. So, this is combined with the services provision, where we have been used to a period after the Second World War, where especially in the European context, the services were provided by companies or by, let's say, agencies that belonged to the public sector. Then from the 80s we switched, mostly in the European unions, in the north part of the European unions, to a form of privatization or liberalization, where agencies or private actors has been involved in the services provision, making them less and less affordable for the people, and at the same time without the provision directly from the government with an affordable way. So we switched from a government that used to be a regulatory actor to a government that actually is now an indirect manager of the services provision. So what is the effect? Is that people are self-organized to provide what is not being provided anymore by the government in an affordable way, and to provide something that sometimes from the private sector is too expensive to be afforded, especially after the economic constraints. So for me the new challenge, and I really embrace the Julia Black opinion about that, is that what is emerging is that regulation of self-organization, or how people are emerging independently, where their interests and with their needs, is a new challenge. So what we need is not a classic approach of this kind of sharing economies activities. We need new rules, we need new procedure, and we need a new form of interaction between the public sector, because of course I'm investigating the regulatory side, and the sharing sector, sharing actor sectors. So for me, the key, what I personally define, is called a new approach called partner up. Why? Because we have been used to a classic approach called a top-down, where from the top of the government services were provided and people were just paying taxes for that. Then we switched to a more governance approach where also people were participating. But I don't think this is the case of the sharing economy, because most of the time the government is not even aware about what is going on in their urban territories. And most of the time, as we saw with my personal research, that most of the time people are not even willing to actually look for the administration, but they are just operating independently. Especially, again, in the services provision and not exclusively in all the sharing economies umbrella. But so, for me, an approach that it could be the new regulatory approach is what I define as partner up, where there is it could refer to a reciprocal willingness of administrator and sharers to meet each other halfway for meeting a common interest. And I'm going to report some examples to show that it is possible. This is of course convenient for the administration to be aware, first of all, of what is going on their territories, and I really agree with activities of ShareNL or Shareable that are starting by mapping the activities on the urban territories. But it could be also interesting for the share, because regulation doesn't mean only taxation, it doesn't mean only access to the market, but it could be a reciprocal help for foster what are the people's needs and what actually are the struggling of the administration in providing and in actually addressing these needs of the people. So I'm going to conclude with two examples. One is the city of Seoul, that for me actually represent a typical top-down example of a regulatory approach for the sharing economy. Because many excellent initiative has been addressed in the territory of Seoul, but mostly through a top-down approach where the mayor really show his willingness and interest in creating Seoul as a sharing city, where you provide 250,000 billions of won for, let's say, new sharing economy enterprises, where he put at disposal of the citizens the city hall for dialoguing with the civil servants, where he actually implemented the service of sharing cars and sharing bikes. But when I look at the example of Seoul, I also wonder at the same time what will happen if the new mayor is not that open to the sharing economies. What will happen to the city of Seoul? I'm pretty sure, of course I don't have an answer, but I'm pretty sure that people will keep self-organizing independently and probably find their own way of long-term economic sustainability. So for me, a very example to what I would like to explore then on the ground with my field studies is the example of Bologna. Bologna is a city in the, let's say, center-north of Italy, where a new regulatory approach has been explored through the establishment of a city lab. Okay, the example of Bologna is more focused on the concept of urban commons. And here I want to precise also something that I'm still working on, is that for me, of course, commons, urban commons and sharing economy match and they meet each other, but they could be also sharing economies without commons. So this example of Bologna is very emblematic, especially in the management of the urban commons. What has been created has been a new regulatory frame where a multi-layer governance approach has been used. So not only public and private parts has been involved in the process of the drafting of the regulation, but also, for instance, the third sector, of course, but also academic and university sectors. And their goal is not an economic maximization of the public spaces, but the way, the transition to a collaborative ecosystem to find a solution for people's needs, but also for the regeneration of the city itself. But what is very interesting, and I totally embrace this approach, is the last part of the regulation, one of the last articles, where they explicitly say that it's an experimental approach, where all the time, let's say, the laboratory itself experiments new form of where the public administration and the people needs will really match. Because of course, when you explore a urban territory, you can see that many of the activities are so different from each other. not only from city to city, but it could be so many difference from neighborhood to another neighborhood. So there is not possible to just establish one regulatory approach that could really fit for all of these activities. And this is what I'm going to explore with my field study, and with this I conclude. I try to select 3 sectors that are housing, school, and healthcare, where I'm going to see experiences of self-organization people that are actually matching with the characteristic that many, and also me independently, has been established about sharing economies, and how they're actually providing services that are unaffordable from the private sector and are not being providing anymore since long time by the government. And at the same time, they are operating through community activities to the use of underused assets. Some of them can be online activities, some of them are offline activities. But what is interesting for me is how these people are really breaking the chain of the traditional economic system, but in a economic and environmental and community sustainable way. So I really hope that the exploration of this great job of these people can really lead the way to the regeneration of the city, not only from the use of underused assets, but from the economic and especially from the social point of view. So I want to thank you, and I hope I can have a lot of feedback to have a very open confrontation for further discussion and investigation. Thank you.